Okay.
Not sure I managed to.
These are quite high.
They are quite high.
Oh, and you can't Can we put them down a little bit? Oh, hey, there we go. Are we still in shot?
She's still in shot.
Okay,
I was going to say, am I not too short? I can reach the floor. It's amazing.
Claire looks like a giant.
There we go.
It's nice
Okay.
when the feet touch the floor, isn't it?
Good, okay. So you might have to just adjust the camera. Oh, fancy. Thank you very much. Very nice.
This is the sort of support we need. So both Claire and I have got our notes. I'm on my phone, she's on paper, but it helps us remember what we practice together.
Yeah.
So hopefully this will.
Yeah, I was going to say, as soon as I get up in front of people, my brain goes entirely blank, even when it's about my own life. So please forgive the notes.
So, Claire, do you want to start by sharing something about your mental health experiences that you come to talk about today?
Yes. So I volunteered to talk about mental health and my experience of it today, partly relating to eating disorders. And it's a pretty vulnerable thing to be talking about, but I feel like we need to be talking about it more. So I'm going to share intensely personal things in a room full of people in the hope that it encourages us to be more open with each other. So, prayers welcome. Okay. I started struggling with depression from the age of about 14, and anxiety followed not long after that. And interestingly, this wasn't that long after I was baptised. My particular brand of anxiety was based largely around a fear of being sick, which apparently is really very common, which I didn't find out until years later, and I really wish I'd known at the time, because that would have helped. Because of this fear, I often wouldn't eat, especially if I was going out anywhere, and this led to weight loss, and I found that I liked getting thinner, and I liked controlling the food that I ate. I couldn't control my anxiety and fear, but I could control what I was eating, so that led to disordered eating. And it's probably the worst through sixth form and the first year of university, when I could barely sit through a lecture without having a panic attack. Being anywhere that I couldn't easily escape would induce panic attacks. Places like the cinema or the theatre or church became almost impossible. And I found anxiety the hardest to deal with because it affected my ability to conduct my day-to-day life. But through this, I also had quite severe depression, which crept up on me really slowly. It took me a really long time to figure out what it was and what was going on with me. I was probably about at least 17 or 18 before I figured out what was happening to me. My mum used to take me to the doctor all the time for tiredness, which was probably one of the main symptoms. Just tiredness and apathy were the main things that I felt. I didn't want to do anything. Nothing really held much joy for me anymore. Going out and seeing people involved putting on my happy mask and pretending that everything was fine. And depression is kind of like slowly having all of your feelings extracted one by one. It starts with the good ones, like happiness and excitement and interest in things, but eventually it works through all of them until mostly what you're left with is numbness. In my experience, depression is much more an absence of feelings than anything else. I don't have a particular trauma in my life that my depression and anxiety stem from. It just seems to be how my brain works. It runs in the family. And that can actually make the guilt worse, because you feel like you've not got any reason to be feeling this way. And you shouldn't be feeling this way, and it makes you a bad person.
Thank you. I think that's a really clear description of how it could begin and just build and almost take over your life as an experience.
Yeah, big time. Yeah.
It would be really good to hear a bit about how you experienced God during that time.
Yeah, so in some ways being a Christian actually made it harder. I had a lot of guilt for a long time. We're told that we should be full of the joy of the Lord. And sometimes even that despair is a sin. And I felt guilty for not being able to feel joy or to feel like I could worship him with my whole heart. And I also found sometimes that the absence of feeling meant that I really struggled to feel loved by God. And sometimes it felt like having a relationship with a brick wall. I think we've probably all experienced that feeling at some point in our lives. And I also felt incredibly angry because of that, and because of the fact that I just seemed to have been made this way. It felt like I'd been made to be miserable. But all that said, I still, somewhere inside, had this tiny spark of hope that kept me going. This tiny belief that this isn't all there is, and that there's more to this life and this existence than what I was experiencing. And without my faith in Jesus, I'm not sure I'd still be here. There were definitely times I didn't want to be. It's hard to explain what it's like, but it's like the pilot light didn't go out. Realising that what I had was depression was a big part of things improving. At Spring Harvest one year, I found a book called A Practical Workbook for the Depressed Christian, which may be the worst book title ever thought of. But it was actually a really, really good book, a really helpful book. It helped me enormously. It's by a doctor who's also a Christian. And it just went through all the symptoms of depression, the many varied, wonderful symptoms that there are, explaining them and taking a Christian perspective. And it helped me to understand what I was going through, and also that I wasn't a bad person for going through it. And it did a huge amount to assuage the guilt that I felt, which went a long way to kind of accepting what was going on and to then doing something about it. Also, while I was at university, I read Ecclesiastes for the first time, which was a revelation. It asked a lot of the questions that I was asking. Just like, what is the point of life? Everything's terrible. Why are we here? And it really doesn't give you any answers. But it let me know that it was okay to be asking those questions in the first place. I've tried counselling a few times, and eventually when I was 19, I started taking antidepressant medication, and I've been using it on and off ever since. And I've struggled with that sometimes, because I've worried that taking it has meant that I'm somehow not myself, that I was giving up, but actually it's changed my life. And I've realised, it took me a while to realise this, but it's actually allowed me to be much more myself than who I am when I'm depressed. Yeah.
It's amazing the journey that you've gone on with him, and the things that he brought you into, although that book title is ridiculous. But I also feel like I really want to go have a look at that book to see if it's any good, because that seems like a really useful resource potentially.
And I think it made it stand out to me. Like, I feel like God took me to that book, and maybe he gave it the terrible title so that people would be like, that's terrible, I'm going to look at it.
You need a little bit of comedy and light relief in that moment, perhaps.
Definitely.
But perhaps we've updated it with the best titles. So you've been brought through, I'm spinning on this chair. You've been kind of brought from this place where you felt angry at him and struggled to connect and come through into a different place. How do you experience God now?
Okay, so my faith has definitely grown and matured. I have struggles and doubts and questions like everybody does. And especially with 2 small children now, I do not invest as much time in my relationship with him as I would like to. So I'm sure lots of you can relate to as well. I think the main thing I've learned is that I don't rely on my feelings nearly so much. I might not be able to feel God, but that doesn't mean he's not there. I'm not necessarily someone that has big emotional experiences with the Holy Spirit, and I find that hard sometimes. But I hold on to the things that I know and I'm sure of, and I figure he'll answer the rest when I meet him. One thing I'm really learning is where my value is at the moment. We live in a society under capitalism, and a lot of the time that places our value on our productivity. And God is not like that. You can achieve nothing at all with your life, and you are still his precious child, and he loves you. He values his relationship with you, not what you can do for him. One thing I did want to say today is that there's a bit of a mental health crisis in this country at the moment for many and complex reasons. I think recently there's a little bit of a danger of passing off problems as depression, which are actually a bit more situational. Let me explain what I mean by that. We live in a society where we're more isolated than we're designed to be. We are designed for community, to live together with others. And church can be good for that, actually, if you're doing it right. For women especially, it's common to find yourself in a relationship where you're not valued as you should be. Those who are wives and mothers can end up with that being their whole identity because they've no capacity for anything else. Many live in unequal households where they're burdened with work and childcare and managing a home and everyone in it. Those who are single feel less valued because society often tells women that their worth is in being a wife or a mother. And yet the work of mothers is also undervalued. So it's not surprising that women get depressed. And as I said, we live in a capitalist society which tells us our value is in what we produce. Our worth comes from what we contribute to the workforce and economy. And the cost of living crisis at the moment means that many of us are struggling financially enormously. So when you take all of that, it's really not surprising that a lot of people are struggling with mental health problems. But I think we're wrong sometimes when we blame the individual for issues that are actually societal. Sometimes depression in itself is the problem. Sometimes it's a symptom of something else. I think because I've experienced both feelings, I kind of know how they feel different, if that makes sense. And God has been showing me lately that the real benefits of a good community and how we're designed to live alongside others. And our life group have been really trying to do that better. Getting alongside each other in a practical way and being there with each other through thick and thin, and that can make such a huge difference to not feeling like you're alone in things. And yeah, I feel really strongly that God wants us to do more of that.
Yeah. That's a really encouraging perspective, Claire, that actually one of the ways that we can make a meaningful difference to somebody is literally stuff like this.
Yeah.
Coming somewhere and having a conversation with someone where you just are real with them and talk to them and accept them for who they are, because I think you're right, society puts so much stuff on us all, and there are some things that get specifically put on women, other things get specifically put on men, but
Yeah,
it's
definitely.
not about them. They have their own space. And I think some of that, you can see how that will contribute to that mental health crisis. I guess that leads really nicely on to our last question, which I'm going to unlock my phone, I'll remember the wording of, which is, what advice would you give to others from your experience, drawing from what you've been through?
Yeah, so the biggest one is to talk about it. Often if you're experiencing something like this, you think you're the only one and that you're a total freak. I know that I did. You are probably not. Probably. Our brains all do weird stuff. We all find different ways to cope with what's going on inside us. Some people pull out their hair, some people self-harm. And if someone shares something like this with you, try not to freak out. At least not externally. Because we find ways to cope with our feelings externally that can seem strange to others, but actually it's a way of your brain trying to protect you and trying to keep you alive and trying to keep you healthy. In the Bible, they talk about how they rip their clothes or wear scratchy shirts. And it's a way of finding an external release for what's going on inside you. And in our culture, we're not always very good at this, especially as Christians. We feel like we have to be positive and be okay all the time. And that's not healthy. And that's not what God expects of us. You only have to look at the Psalms, at Lamentations, at Ecclesiastes to see that we aren't expected to be positive and happy all the time. And if you're supporting someone with depression, you need to get okay with them not being okay most of the time. I found it really hard to be honest with people about how I was, because most of the time the answer was, I'm actually really quite crap. And it's a long-term thing. You don't need to try and fix someone. Just be with them and keep inviting them to stuff even if they never come, because the invite still matters even if you don't feel like you can get there, and one day they might. As a church, we can build a community where people can truly be themselves without having to put a mask on, and I think that's what we're all aiming for. Sometimes God will heal people of mental health problems. Sometimes he won't. I don't know why. None of us really know why. But I know it's not because you didn't pray hard enough. It's not because you didn't want enough. It's not because you didn't have enough faith. And it's okay to come to God completely empty of anything. I am still very much learning this lesson. He doesn't want anything but you. He has enough joy and enough peace and enough perfection to go around. You don't need to bring any to him yourself. Be angry with him if you need to. I have done that often. He is big enough, he can take it. But whatever it is, just bring it to him. He doesn't want you to keep it all wrapped up inside. He wants you to take it to him and share it with him, whatever it is, however ugly it might be. And lastly, mental health issues do not stop you serving God, thankfully. I went from being someone who couldn't get on a bus by herself, I was too scared, to actually moving to Manchester alone to work for a charity. And I was still the same person with the same issues when I did that, but God led me every step of the way and gave me what I needed to do that. So he still wants you just as you are, whatever issues you might have.
Amen to that, Claire. Thank you so much for sharing. Should we give her a round of applause?
Thanks very much. I'm going to go and enjoy my breakfast now.